Hello there. Welcome once again to Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire, our weekly look at all things energy related. I'm Scott Squires, pleased as per usual to be joined by the energy expert Dan McTagg. Dan, a couple things to get into today: BP forecasting, some EV stuff, some EIA information, and of course, later on in the show, our Ask the Expert segment. But first things first, Dan. Prices in the Atlantic region at the pumps set the next couple of days. Tomorrow, Newfoundland and Labrador, and then the rest of the Atlantic region on Friday. So what are consumers going to see at the pumps in Newfoundland and Labrador tomorrow? And then on Friday, what are the rest of the region going to see?
Well, Scott, as we talked about this last week, it's inching up every single week. We're looking at a 1.3 cent a liter increase in Newfoundland for gasoline and about a 1.6 cent a liter increase for diesel. For the remainder, Atlantic Canada, PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, a little less than that, so a 1 cent increase net for gasoline. In the case of PEI, it actually may drop, half a penny, but we'll still hold to about a penny's increase. And of course, for diesel, up about 1.1 cents a liter. The difference is the 1 day difference means that calculations for the last three Atlantic Canada provinces, like Friday, got the benefit of a drop on markets yesterday, unlike Newfoundland, which of course had to wait until the day before, literally, to have its calculation. So 1 day can make a pretty big difference.
And Dan, as we talk each week about prices and trends and what's happening nationally, but globally as well, I referenced a couple of things off the top that we were going to talk about. So I'll serve it over to you. What do you want to get into next in terms of talking about what's happening with global markets and with trends?
Well, I think we're looking at a market that continues to work very hard to deny reality, economic reality. It's a bell I've been ringing for some time, but you now have not one but two, fairly authoritative voices saying, "Here's the deal: you produce 101 million barrels of oil a day to meet global demand, but that global demand by the end of the year will be 103 million barrels. So there's almost a 2 million barrel a day shortfall." And, no matter how you slice it, no matter what excuses you use, no matter what energy, especially oil traders, are doing, it may very well be a scenario where, we're probably looking at oil more comfortably in the 85 to $87 range, not 80, 81, which is what we're seeing today in the middle of summer. So that has to be a preoccupation and a concern. And yes, you can put in that mixture geopolitical concerns, macroeconomic concerns, hyperventilating over every comment made by Jerome Powell as to whether or not he will drop or taper interest rates. Those are all important issues, but they don't undermine and they do not take away from simple fundamentals. And I know that there are not many energy traders out there who listen to energy analysts. But this is going to leave a mark, and it's going to create a real problem, because if you continue down this road of not supplying the market adequately because your traders are playing this little game of pretending energy commodities are like the stock market. You buy and trade, or you look at other issues. Ignoring fundamentals has significant consequences. And that doesn't take into account things that we can't possibly know today. Geopolitical tensions being one. The second, of course, meteorological issues. What if Hurricane Beryl? I'm here in Toronto today in the region. It's all overcast, a bit of rain here with the remnants of that hurricane. If it had gone only 1 degree further east, you would have taken out 50% of the U.S. refinery capacity in what was a Category 1 hurricane. So again, all of these things are important, nothing to panic about, but on the basis of what is in front of you, the facts don't underestimate that we have a shortage in terms of supply of oil, and the prices are going to have to reflect that sooner or later. Once they do, I think you'll see a lot more production.
And Dan, it's hard to talk about energy prices and what's happening with oil and supply and demand, et cetera, without talking about that elephant in the room. And we talk about it all the time, and that's what's happening with electric vehicles and the push to get everyone, especially here in Canada, into electric vehicles. We've talked about it, right? The mandate by 2035 from the federal government that by then all new cars have to be EVs. What are you seeing on the EV front that's showing where trends may be going there?
Well, the trend is showing a downward track. There is no, with the exception of Quebec, every province, every region in the country has seen a decline in the number of vehicles that are ZEV or zero emission vehicles or EVs. And there's a little bit of an increase in plug-in, electric, but generally speaking, vehicles that are hybrids are doing extraordinarily well. Conventional internal combustion engines are not as good or as strong as they should be, but they're not declining. What is declining in popularity is the hype over electric vehicles, and there's a couple of reasons for that. They're expensive. We know that they can't be built without subsidies. We know that they're not very effective unless the federal government rolls out an additional, and other governments, we need 450,000 public utility charges. We only have 28,000 in Canada. If we're going to meet that goal in 9 years of forcing everybody to drive an electric vehicle, we don't have the infrastructure in place to meet that. Car companies aren't willing to build something in which they're losing money on, and consumers are tapped out. They're not going to go and spend a lot of money on vehicles that aren't just unreliable given our cold climate, but will probably need replacing. A battery on an electric vehicle is $20,000. You lose an engine on an internal combustion engine after 300,000-400,000 kilometers. It's going to cost you a few grand, maybe to get a used one, or to get an equivalent, maybe 8,000 or 9,000, but not 20,000 and up. So there's a lot of factors that we have not taken into consideration. The other one, of course, is just the amount of silly money we've put into. Up until the Honda plant announcement, we had 4 commitments totaling $40 billion to get $19 billion in investments. Look, I'm all for people driving whatever they want to drive. But if you think, as this federal government has done, and its friends and the NDP and the Greens and others, you can create a supply issue. You can flood the market with these things and it'll somehow spur demand. That's never worked anywhere. And it certainly hasn't worked in nations where in Europe, for instance, where that was tried, attempted, and it failed. More importantly, if you do go that model, there are countries that'll take you at your game, China, and they will flood the market. And if it isn't coming directly from China, it will come from Algeria or Morocco, or it will come from Turkey. And I'm not joking about those countries. I'm here, Milton, Oakville, Ontario. All our buses here, the little tiny buses, are all EVs. Well, guess where they're made? In Turkey, and they're made by Chinese companies. So, look, I want, like everyone else, to see that we have that diversity of energy options. And I think that's important for transportation. And we will see that. But putting all our eggs in one basket, trying to come up with a particular time that works for Stephen Guilbeault and the federal Liberals isn't going to work very well for Canadians.
I think that's a good point to say, why put all our eggs in one basket when there's so many potential alternatives out there? And that's something that we can talk about in the weeks ahead. As we're seeing car manufacturers come up with lots of different alternatives, lots of different types of engines, and even improving the internal combustion engine. So let's move on. Again, we'll stay energy related, and something caught my eye just this morning, Dan. And it is in its annual energy outlook, and you can see this at bp.com. They've got it on their website. In its annual energy outlook, BP has revised higher all its forecasts for oil, natural gas, and coal consumption. And again, this is coming right from BP on their website, bp.com. A key nugget: it anticipates the coal demand in its current trajectory would be higher in 2050 than it is in 2000. So when you see a massive player like BP coming out with their outlook, and they've put it right on their website saying that they've revised higher all of their forecasts for oil, natural gas, and coal consumption, what's that tell you?
It tells me that the population is growing. It tells me that developing parts of the world aren't going to slow down. And if we want to meet the demands of the future generation, we're going to have to concentrate on the energies that the world wants, and not pretend that things like solar and wind are somehow going to be the answer that the world needs as it demands more, not less energy. And we want that energy poverty. I think Canadians had better understand what that means. It means turning off your furnace in the middle of winter. It means having less electricity unless we're willing to buy and pay out and buy and build dozens of nuclear reactors. Look, Canada has said no to coal, but there's no doubt that the rest of the world is going to be looking at ways in which to mitigate emissions from coal, scrubbers, cleaner coal, white coal, kind of stuff we saw in Canada, by the way, or we did. But whether it's natural gas or coal, or whether it is oil, or whether it happens to be propane, the world is going to need more energy. And it knows that it cannot get that from windmills that take more energy to produce and create than they produce in terms of all of their nameplate lifetime. So, these are not net positive energy forms of reliable, clean energy. They are, in fact, anything but. Same with the EVs, same with heat pumps, same with solar panels. All of these things take a significant amount of mining. Mine is extremely energy intensive. So is the processing. So I think we need to get real. We need to get smart. We need to get sharp. And we need to get ahead of this by saying, if we're going to use these things, let's make sure that we do what we can. And we've done this here in Canada for generations. Let's make it the cleanest possible energy that is available if the world's going to use more. And you know what? The world is asking Canada for more. We only have one person in this country who happens to be the Prime Minister for now, who's saying, there's no business case, which is, as we all know, in a word, baloney.
Well, we'll segue from baloney into our segment where we engage with our audience and we see what they want to know, what questions they have for Dan, coming up right now on Ask the Expert. Okay, Dan. Our first question comes from a familiar person to Ask the Expert. He asked the very first question when we introduced this segment a few weeks ago, and it's Jerry in Cole Harbour. And Jerry has a simple question, Dan. He's following trends. He's seeing reports and reading things online, and he wants to know what your thoughts are on ammonia as a fuel for vehicles. He saw some reports out there that Toyota has come up with an engine that utilizes ammonia. Dan, I know you used to work for Toyota, not saying that you would have any inside information, but your thoughts. We talk about lots of alternatives here, hydrogen, etc., but ammonia as a fuel, what are your thoughts?
I think it's certainly something well worth pursuing, and it does speak to the diversity of transportation methods. The current problem, which I think those who want this on a massive scale for wider adoption would be confronted with, is what do you do with the emissions? Nitrous oxide isn't exactly something you want to have coming out of any tailpipe, despite the fact that it sounds great and it wouldn't have the other traditional CO2 attributes. The other problem with ammonia is, of course, how do you heat it? Because the higher the temps, even at cold temps, it actually can freeze human flesh. Now, I'm not saying this is a scary scenario, but it's important to understand that it takes much higher ignition to actually cause it to ignite, to burn, and to create the kind of combustion you need that you would hope is clean. And so I think we're still in the test labs on this. And if it does come to be, then obviously it would be a game changer of many game changers. Toyota, for instance, has the program using hydrogen and ammonia with gasoline. They're working, from what I understood about a year ago, with Chevron and with some racing car companies to create a smaller engine with as much fuel efficiency and strength and as much horsepower as you would have in a traditional internal combustion engine or an EV equivalent battery. But I take the point, and Toyota's correct. Putting all our eggs in one basket, as you said earlier, is not the way to go with EVs. There's many other options out there, and I think they're well worth pursuing in the generations to come.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you to Jerry in Cole Harbour for another great question. We appreciate it, Jerry, and we're glad that you're listening and watching Prices at the Pumps. We've got a second question for Ask the Expert, Dan, and it comes from Megan in Sydney. And Megan has a question about heat pumps, and she says, I hear a lot of things about heat pumps not working in cold temperatures, and then I see others saying that, you can get ones that work up to minus 35. She's thinking about getting one, and she wants to know your thoughts. And are there ones that will function in a cold maritime winter?
Well, the answer is yes, they will function, and yes, they have their place, and they're good for a little bit of cooling, and they're good for a little bit of warming, but they don't work and serve in the extremes. The other problem you face in the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, is you get ice buildup, and that can be a problem, especially if as these are outdoor units, and the fan needs to work. If you get ice on that, it slows it down, then it's not going to work as well. But specifically, and having had a heat pump and coming from a family of installers, they have their place, but it is not on the cold days. Anything under minus 15, minus 20, most will tell you there isn't enough warmth in the air that it can draw from to keep the house warm. And so, there may also be technical challenges. Some insurance companies won't insure a home that's strictly running on a heat pump. So you may want to check that before. And of course, all of this relies on the electrical grid. That's not to say that a furnace doesn't need electricity for natural gas or oil. But heat pumps are unique in the sense that they can only draw from electricity. And so you want to be careful, especially in Canada where, late season storms Nova Scotia, where you're from, tends to knock out power in wide swaths of regions for a very long period of time. Natural gas in a house or propane, at least you can get out there, ignite it, and you got yourself the ability to cook a meal or to keep maybe the furnace or at least the fireplace going, if that's the kind of installment you have there. Bottom line, it works. And it works for some, but it doesn't work for everybody. And it's become less efficient in colder climates like Canada's.
A big thank you to Megan in Sydney for her question as well. And thank you to everyone who watches and submits questions for Ask the Expert. Okay, Dan, we're going to wrap up here in a second. But before we do, when you're not with us here on SaltWire for Prices at the Pumps, I know that you're out and about doing lots of other stuff. Where can folks find you and connect with you?
Yeah, affordableenergy.ca, president at affordableenergy.ca is the best way to get a hold of me. Of course, if you want to engage me on Twitter, that's always a lot of fun as well. Sometimes good, sometimes spirited. So Gas Wizard is the gas that we run, but Gas Price Wizard on Twitter is my handle. And that's also another way to communicate with me.
Dan, as always, we appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day there in Ontario. Have a great rest of the week, a wonderful weekend ahead. And we'll reconvene and do this in a week's time. How's that sound?
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me here, Scott.
All the best. Thank you, Dan.
Take care, Scott.